On the morning of March the 4th, Clyde Watkins woke up before the sun. He had done it for 31 years. He did not set an alarm. He did not need to. His body had learned the schedule so well that it rose on its own at 4:15 every single morning, the way water finds its level, the way a compass needle swings north without being told. He sat on the edge of his bed in the dark for a moment, listening to the cold, and then he put on his clothes. He was 64 years old, with wide working hands and a back that had been arguing with him since his mid-40s. He had spent most of those years standing at a grill the size of a small car, at a diner called Pearl's on the corner of Hendricks and Morrow in Dunmore, Georgia, a town of 11,000 people where everybody knew everybody, and the biggest news was usually who won the Friday fish fry. That was the last morning he would ever go in. He had told them on a Tuesday 3 weeks prior, told Pearl's granddaughter Renee, who owned the place now, that he was stepping back. His knees, mostly. His doctor had been after him for 2 years. He had $78 left in his personal checking account after his medication and his light bill, and a social security check that was supposed to start coming in 60 days, and a son in Savannah who called twice a week and worried about him. What Clyde Watkins did not know on that last dark morning was that 473 people in and around Dunmore had been making phone calls for the past 6 days. He did not know that people he had not thought about in years had been gathering quietly, some of them weeping into their phones as they made those calls. He didn't know that every plate of food he had ever made, every cup of coffee he had ever set down without a word of complaint, every early morning he had stood over that grill while the rest of the town was still sleeping, had been adding up, had been kept track of by people he had assumed never noticed him at all. He just put on his apron one last time and drove to work in the dark. Pearl's Diner had not changed much since Clyde first walked through the door in 1993 when he was 33 years old and newly moved to Dunmore after his divorce and looking for work. The booths were still the same cracked red vinyl. The floor was still the same black and white tile. The ceiling had 2 water stains that had been there since at least 1997. The coffee station behind the counter had been updated once, in 2008, and the pie case by the register still had a crack in its corner that nobody had ever gotten around to fixing. He loved the place. He would not have said so out loud. He was not that kind of man. But he had gone in there every morning for 31 years, and that was its own kind of love, the kind that does not announce itself. Clyde was born in this part of Georgia, raised in a house with 5 siblings and a mother who worked at the shirt factory and a father who did roofing until his body gave out. He learned to cook because his mother came home tired, and someone had to. He had a gift for it that he did not fully understand, only accepted. Food tasted better when he made it. People finished their plates, people came back. That was all he knew, and it was enough. When he took the job at Pearl's in '93, the original Pearl was still alive. She was a 70-year-old woman with a grey bun and a direct manner, and she had told him on his first morning that it was simple. Show up, do the work, and don't give her any trouble, and she wouldn't give him any. He had respected that completely. He had not given her any trouble. Any. Pearl died in 2009 and left the diner to her daughter, and her daughter ran it until 2016 when her knees gave out and she handed it to her own daughter Renee, who was 32 and had grown up eating Clyde's biscuits every Saturday morning. Renee had put a chalkboard sign out front that said, "Family Cooking," since 1971. Clyde had noticed it and said nothing, which was also his way. He had cooked through 3 hurricanes, 1 ice storm that shut the town for 4 days, a gas leak in 2004 that closed the kitchen for a week, and the COVID shutdown in 2020, which had been, in ways he couldn't fully name, the strangest and most frightening stretch of his working life. He had kept Pearl's feeding people during that period, doing curbside alone, sometimes 12-hour days because people needed food, and he was there and could provide it. He had not spoken about this afterward. It had not occurred to him that anyone was keeping count. The night nurses at Dunmore General, 6 blocks away, had always stopped at Pearl's before their shift ended at 7 in the morning. Clyde knew their orders by heart. Tamara took her eggs over easy and her grits with a little extra butter. Deidre always got the biscuit sandwich with sausage, no cheese, and a sweet tea. There was a man named Harold who worked admissions and came in 3 mornings a week and always ordered the same thing: coffee black, 2 pancakes, and a small glass of orange juice. Clyde had been making those pancakes for Harold for 11 years. He did not know that Harold sat in his car in the Pearls parking lot the week before Clyde's last day and called his brother in Cincinnati and cried. Not because of the pancakes exactly, because of what the pancakes meant. Because every time life had been hard, every divorce proceeding, every hospital waiting room, every bad piece of news that had arrived in the small hours of the night, Harold had come to Pearls before the sun came up, and Clyde had set a plate in front of him without a word, and Harold had been able to breathe again. The worst of it had been in 2018, when Harold's mother had been in a decline, and the nights in the hospital had run together into one grey stretch of waiting. He had gone to Pearls every morning of those 11 days, arriving at 5:30 before his shift at the hospital began, and Clyde had never once asked what was going on. He had not needed to ask. He had simply watched Harold come in and sit down, and he had made the pancakes and put them down and refilled the coffee when it got low, and that had been enough. That had been, Harold understood now, an act of grace performed without ceremony, and it had cost Clyde nothing except the choice to see him morning after morning and to respond to what he saw. Nobody should just leave, Harold had told his brother. Nobody who did that much should just slip out the back without a single person saying anything. His brother had asked how many people he thought might come if he made the calls. Harold had said he had no idea. He had said he was going to find out. And so Harold had started making calls. He called people he knew from years of working at Dunmore General. He called people who had mentioned Pearls in passing over the years. People who had said the name the way you say the name of a place that is woven into how you understand your own days. He called Renee first, and she had gone quiet on the phone for a moment and then said she was already in. He called the night nurses. He called the teacher who had graded papers in the corner booth. He reached out to a woman named Dawn, who ran the community board on a local Facebook group, and she had posted something, and the responses had come in faster than either of them expected. The thing about Clyde was that he was not a celebrity. He was not a character in the way some people are. He did not perform warmth, he did not tell long stories or collect devoted followers or post anything on social media. He was a short, broad man with a slight limp and steady eyes and a habit of humming very quietly to himself while he worked, something he probably did not realize he was doing. People had been watching him for 31 years. They had just not told him. There was Carla, who had graduated high school in 2002 and had come to Pearls the morning of her ceremony because her mother was sick and could not take her out to breakfast. Her mother had been in the hospital for 3 weeks by then, and Carla had been managing the house and her 2 younger sisters on her own. And on the morning of her graduation, she had put on the cap and gown that she had been looking forward to for 4 years, and she had driven herself to the diner because she could not face going home first. She had sat alone in a corner booth in her cap and gown, 22 years old, and pretending not to cry. And Clyde had come out from the kitchen, which he almost never did, and set a plate of French toast down in front of her. He had not said anything. He had just set it down and gone back. The French toast had a little powdered sugar on it, which was not on the menu, and which she had not asked for. She had eaten every bite. She had thought about it many times over the years, in the way you think about moments that arrived at exactly the right time, and that you did not deserve, and that you cannot forget. It was not a large thing in the ledger of the world. A plate of French toast. A man who noticed a girl in a graduation gown sitting alone and decided, without deliberation, that she should have something warm in front of her. Carla was 40 years old now and lived 40 minutes outside of Dunmore. She had told Harold yes before he had even finished asking. She had been the one, actually, who suggested they try to reach Tommy. There was a man named Tommy who had been homeless for 3 years between 2010 and 2013 and who had come into Pearls every cold morning without money and sat in the far corner and never ordered anything. And Clyde had, every single time, set a cup of coffee and a plate of biscuits in front of him and charged him nothing. Not once in 3 years had he made Tommy feel small for it. He had not done it with a visible gesture of charity, had not announced it, had not even particularly caught Tommy's eye. He had simply brought the coffee and the biscuits and set them down and moved on, as if Tommy's being there were a natural fact of the morning. That was the part Tommy remembered most. Not the food, though the food had mattered, had been some mornings the only thing he ate. What he remembered was that Clyde had never made him feel like a problem to be managed. He had made him feel like someone who was there. Renee had not known this until Harold called her, but she had looked at the old ticket records and understood, scanning the handwritten tabs from those years and seeing the gap where Tommy's order would have been. The little void in the accounting that turned out to be 3 years of quiet daily care. She had sat down in her office and pressed her hands over her face. Tommy now ran a small landscaping business out of Hartwell, 2 counties over. His brother had let him stay in 2013, and things had slowly improved in the way that things do when someone gives you the time and the ground floor to rebuild from. He had learned the landscaping trade by working for someone else for 4 years, and then started his own operation with 2 clients and a borrowed truck. He was driving down on his own. No one had even asked him. Clyde did his last shift on a Friday. The drive-in was 6 minutes, the same as always. He knew every turn without thinking about it, knew which stoplight took longest, knew the spot where the streetlight had been out for 3 years and the city never fixed it. He drove in the dark with the heater running low and the radio off, the way he preferred. He had never needed music to wake up. The act of going in was enough. He worked from 5 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, the same as always. Renee had offered to close the diner that day to make something of it, and Clyde had told her no, he did not want any fuss, he just wanted to finish the same way he had started. She had nodded and said, okay, and inside she had been planning for 2 weeks. The morning crowd came in the way it always had. The teachers who needed to be in their classrooms by 7:30. The man from the tyre shop on Route 9 who always took his coffee standing at the counter because he said sitting down made him feel like he was wasting time. The pair of older women who met every Friday morning and had been doing so since their husbands died, who ordered the same thing every week and talked for 2 hours and were, as far as Clyde could tell, what kept each other going. He cooked everything with the same attention he had given on day 1 31 years ago. The French toast was perfect. The biscuits were golden. He made his grits with the patience of someone who understood that rushing them changed them, and he did not rush anything on that morning or on any morning before it. He moved through the kitchen the way he always moved, economical and deliberate without wasted motion, quiet except for that low hum that lived somewhere under his breath. The 2 young women working the counter had learned not to interrupt that hum. It meant he was right in the middle of something, and the timing was exactly what it needed to be. The morning itself was quiet the way it always was. The regulars came in. The orders were placed. There was a moment around 6:15 when the morning rush was at its peak and every burner was running and the orders were stacking up on the rail, and Clyde moved through it the way he had always moved through it, without rushing, without a word of complaint, managing 6 things at once in the contained and orderly way of someone who had made peace with the complexity long ago. He had once told a young cook who worked briefly at Pearl's and then left for a chain restaurant in Augusta that the secret to not getting overwhelmed was to never look at all the orders at once. You make the one in front of you, then you make the next one. He cooked everything with the same attention he had given on day 1, 31 years ago. The French toast was perfect. The biscuits were golden. He made his grits with the patience of someone who understood that rushing them changed them. And he did not rush anything on that morning or on any morning before it. At 1:30, Renee came back to the kitchen. She told him his shift was done and she was sending him home early just this once. He protested, gently, that there was still a half hour left. She told him she had it covered. He untied his apron and folded it carefully, the way he always did, and set it on the hook by the walk-in cooler. He said goodbye to the 2 young women working the counter. He picked up his keys and his hat from the break room, and he walked out through the side door, which is how he always came and went, never through the front. He went home and he sat in his kitchen for a while with a glass of sweet tea, and the quiet was so unfamiliar that it almost hurt. He had not been home on a Friday afternoon in 31 years. He did not know what to do with his hands. He went to bed early and slept deeply and dreamlessly. He woke at 4:15 on Saturday, same as always. He lay there for several minutes, which was unusual for him. There was nowhere to go. He had thought somehow that stopping would feel like relief. It felt instead like having a tooth pulled. You know it had to happen. You know the aching was real and the removal was right. But the space it leaves is its own kind of ache. He made himself coffee. He sat at the kitchen table, his phone was on the table, and it was quiet, and he was too proud to look at it for texts that might not be there. He watched the sky turn grey out his kitchen window, then pink, then pale gold. He was still sitting there when his son Marcus called at 6:30 in the morning, an unusual hour for Marcus, who was not a morning person. "Hey, Dad," Marcus said. "How are you doing?" "Fine," Clyde said, "just sitting." "You hear anything unusual from outside?" Clyde frowned and looked toward the window. "No. Why?" "Go look," Marcus said, and his voice had something in it that Clyde could not quite name. Clyde set down his coffee and walked to the front of the house. He opened the front door. He stood on his porch in his house clothes, a man of 64, on a cool Georgia morning, and he looked down Pekin Street, which ran at an angle toward Hendricks Avenue, which ran directly past Pearl's Diner. He counted the cars for a moment before his mind could even process what he was seeing. There were headlights stretching all the way down Pekin Street and around the corner and out of sight. Just headlights. Row after row in the grey gold of a Georgia dawn, perfectly still, like some kind of procession that had paused itself out of respect. "Marcus," he said. "Marcus, what is this?" "Go on, Dad," Marcus said. "Just go on." Clyde went inside and put on his good shirt and his shoes. He did not know what he was dressing for, only that Marcus had told him to go. He moved through the house without fully thinking, the way you move when you are following a thread of feeling rather than a plan. He drove the 3 blocks to Pearl's without really understanding what he was driving toward. He turned off Pekin Street, and the headlights came into view before the diner did. Just the glow of them, amber and white in the pre-dawn grey, stretching back further than the streetlights reached. He slowed the car without meaning to. His foot eased off the gas, and the car crept forward, and he looked at what was ahead of him, and his mind was very slow and very quiet. As he turned onto Hendricks, the lot came into view. It was full. The side street was full. The overflow lot across from the hardware store was full. Cars lined the road for half a mile in both directions. People were standing outside their vehicles, standing on the sidewalk, standing in the early morning light, some of them with coffee cups, some of them with their hands in their pockets, some of them already crying, though he could not have told you why. Not yet. He recognized faces as he pulled slowly past. The dispatcher from the overnight shift, a woman named Gloria, who had been coming in since 2011. The retired schoolteacher he had known since she was a young woman with children in tow. A man from his own street whose name he did not know but whose breakfast order he knew by heart. A girl in a parka who looked young enough that he was surprised she had known where to find this place at all until she turned and he recognized her, and he realized she was not a girl anymore. He parked on the grass at the edge of the lot because there was nowhere else. Renee was standing near the door of the diner. When she saw him, she did not say anything at first. She just walked over to him and took his hands in both of hers and held them. "How many?" he said. "We counted 206 cars," Renee said. "People been pulling in since 5 this morning. Some of them came last night and waited in the lot overnight. Tommy Graves drove in from Hartwell." Clyde turned and looked at the lot and the street and all those people standing in the early light. "Why would they do this?" he said, and it was not really a question. Renee looked at him steadily. "Because of you," she said. "Because they wanted you to know. Because they should have said it a long time ago and they didn't, and Harold was not going to let you just walk away." Someone started clapping. Just one person, somewhere in the middle of the lot. A slow, deliberate sound in the cold morning air. And then the person next to them. And then the next. It moved through the crowd the way sound moves through water, spreading outward until the whole parking lot was clapping. 200 people in the grey Georgia dawn, clapping for a diner cook who had never once asked for anything. Clyde stood very still. His jaw worked. He pressed his mouth together and looked up at the sky because he was not the kind of man who let people see him cry in public. And this was going to be a fight. He lost it. He covered his face with one hand and he wept quietly, in the way that men do when the thing breaking open inside them is too big to be held back anymore. Renee put her arm around his shoulder. Marcus appeared at his side because Marcus had driven up from Savannah the night before and parked on the next block and walked over, and he put his hand on his father's back and stood there without speaking. The clapping did not stop for a long time. If you have ever known someone whose labour was so consistent and so reliable that the world came to treat it as weather, as something that simply happened, as natural and unremarkable as a sunrise, then you understand what was breaking open in that parking lot. We forget to say thank you to the things that never fail. We forget to look up from our plates. We forget that the warmth and the constancy we counted on was never an accident, was never a machine, was always a person choosing, morning after morning, to show up and do it right. Carla came forward first. She was in a parka, and her eyes were already red. She told Clyde about the graduation morning, about the French toast, about how that one quiet act of care had stayed with her for 22 years. He did not remember it specifically, and the fact that he did not remember it made her cry harder, because that was the point. He had done it without calculating the return. He had done it simply because she was there and she needed it. Harold came forward next. He was a tall, thin man with greying temples and careful eyes, and he shook Clyde's hand for a long time before he could speak. When he did, he just said, "Every hard morning, every single one, you were there." Clyde nodded once and pressed his hand back. There were others. A teacher who had graded papers in the corner booth every Sunday morning for 12 years. A police dispatcher who had worked overnight shifts for a decade and stopped at Pearl's every morning at 6 because it was the one reliable warm thing in her life. A woman who had sat with her mother in the diner during the last weeks of her mother's illness, when the hospice had been nearby, and who said that the food Clyde cooked had been the only thing her mother could finish a full plate of in those last weeks because it tasted like something somebody had made with care. That one stopped Clyde entirely. He stood with his hand over his mouth and he just listened. Renee had arranged coffee service on folding tables by the side of the building, and someone had brought a cake, and someone else had brought a long paper banner that was strung between two poles and said, in uneven handwritten letters, 31 years. And then below that, "Thank you, Clyde." It was not elegant. It was exactly right. The morning stretched on past what any of them had planned. People stayed longer than they meant to. The conversations were the kind that only happen when something real is at the centre of them. People who did not know each other found themselves comparing memories. The time Clyde had stayed an extra hour to make sure the church breakfast was covered. The time he had quietly wrapped up a to-go bag for a woman waiting for a ride who everyone could see did not have bus fare. Small things, each one. Together, they were something else. Marcus stood near his father and watched the people come and heard the things they said and felt something settle in his chest that he had not been able to name for years. He had worried about his father in the way adult children worry when a parent is alone and aging and the texture of their days is invisible from a distance. He had not known what Clyde's days actually contained. He had not known what his father was to this town. He knew now. At some point during the late morning, Renee stood beside Clyde and told him she had something to give him. She had a card first, a handmade thing with signatures covering every inch of it, people he knew and some he did not, from Dunmore and from towns he would not have expected. She had also, she said, been collecting from the community for the past 3 weeks, quietly, a few dollars from this person and a few from that one, and she held out an envelope. Clyde looked at the envelope. He did not reach for it immediately. "Renee," he said. "Don't," she said. "Just take it." Inside was a check that represented what 417 people had contributed. It was not a fortune. It was $6,240. To Clyde, who had $78 in his checking account, it was more than he could hold in his mind all at once. He stood with the check in his hands for a long time. "That's not what this morning is about," he finally said. "I don't want you all to think that this is about money." "We know," Harold said from somewhere nearby. "That's why we gave it. There is a thing that happens to people who have spent a lifetime being useful, being reliable, being the one who shows up. They often become convinced, without realizing it, that their value is purely functional, that they are necessary in the way a gas stove is necessary, in the way a water heater is necessary, important for what they produce and not for what they are. It is a quiet lie that hardship and invisibility tell, and most people who carry it do not even know it has settled on them. What happened in that parking lot on a Saturday morning in March was the refutation of that lie. Clyde was not thanked for his eggs or his biscuits or his grits, though those things were mentioned and loved. He was thanked for the specific quality of his presence. For the fact that when people arrived at their hardest hours, he had been there, calm and consistent, and had fed them without requiring them to explain themselves. He was thanked for 31 years of choosing to care about the thing in front of him, every morning, without an audience. He had an audience now. The conversations that followed the clapping were the kind that do not happen at planned events. They happened between people who barely knew each other except as faces in a diner booth. People who discovered, standing in a Georgia parking lot at 7 in the morning, that the thing they had in common was specific and deep. A nurse and a retired mechanic who had both lost someone that Pearls had helped them hold on to, at least through the mornings, at least through the breakfasts. A woman who taught 3rd grade and a man who drove for a logistics company who both said, independently and without coordination, that they had come back to Dunmore from other places partly because of the kind of place it was, and that Pearls, and specifically the man who cooked there, had been a piece of what they meant when they said that. Clyde moved through it slowly, the way a person moves when they are not sure they believe what is happening. He shook hands. He accepted hugs from people he did not recognize until they told him their names, and then something shifted in his face. He had not known that he remembered them. He had not kept a ledger. He had simply made the food and kept the coffee coming and shown up. It turned out that was enough to be remembered. It turned out that was, in fact, a great deal. He stayed until nearly noon, which was a Saturday, and the diner was supposed to open at 7, and Renee had simply not opened it, had put a handwritten sign on the door that said, "Closed this morning for something important," and no regular customer had complained about it because every regular customer was in the parking lot. When the crowd finally began to thin and the last of the coffee was gone, and people had hugged him and shaken his hand and taken photographs that he had allowed with the bemused patience of a man who was not used to being in photographs, Clyde sat down on the low concrete barrier at the edge of the parking lot. Marcus sat next to him. They were quiet together for a while. The lot was nearly empty now, the cars having thinned through the late morning. A few paper cups and napkins skipped across the pavement in a light wind, and somewhere from inside the diner, a radio was playing, low. "You knew," Clyde said. "Harold called me 2 weeks ago," Marcus said. "I've been sitting on it since." Clyde nodded. He looked at the check in his hand, which he had been holding without thinking about it. He looked at the banner still strung between the two poles in the early afternoon light. "I just cooked," he said. Marcus looked at his father. "Dad," he said gently. That's the thing. In the weeks after, things changed for Clyde in ways he had not foreseen and would not have thought to ask for. Renee called him in April, not to offer him his job back, but to ask if he would come in on Saturday mornings, just the mornings, to teach the 2 young cooks she had hired how to make the biscuits the way he made them. It was a request she framed carefully, because she understood his pride and did not want to diminish it. He said he would think about it and called her back in 2 days and said yes. He came in on Saturday mornings through the spring and into summer. He stood at the counter beside a 23-year-old named Dawn and a 20-year-old named Aisha, and he showed them how the biscuits worked, not from a recipe, but from feel, the same way he had learned everything that mattered. Dawn had a talent for it that surprised Clyde, and Clyde told him so directly, which was as much praise as either of them needed. He went to doctor appointments without postponing them. His son called more often. He slept past 5 on mornings when he did not need to be anywhere, which still felt strange and wrong, but which he was learning to accept, slowly, the way you learn any new grammar. He got a letter in May from a woman he did not recognise. She had been living in Dunmore in the late 90s and early 2000s, and she had moved away in 2006. She had seen a post on a community page about the morning in the parking lot and had tracked down his address through Renee. She wrote to tell him that she had been going through her separation in 2003 and had eaten at Pearl's every morning for 4 months because she could not bring herself to cook for herself alone, and that his food had kept her tethered to the ordinary world during a period when the ordinary world had felt very far away. He read the letter twice, and then he set it on his kitchen table and sat with his coffee. He thought about what it meant, that a person could do a thing faithfully for 30 years and never know what that thing was doing in other people's lives. He thought about how many mornings there had been. 31 years of working weeks. He had figured it once, in an idle moment, and come out to somewhere around 8,600 mornings. 8,600 days of the alarm before light, of the drive on empty streets, of the grill heating up and the biscuits going in and the first customers coming through the door with their quiet pre-coffee faces. 8,600 opportunities to do it right or to do it halfway, and he had done it right because that was the only way he knew how. He thought about all the mornings he had gone in feeling tired or sore or low, the months after his own divorce long ago, the winter his back had been bad enough that he had gripped the edge of the grill station to steady himself. He had not allowed any of that to change what he put on the plates. He had done that because it was right, not because anyone was watching. He had believed in a quiet and unexamined way that the right thing done without witness was still the right thing done, and he had acted on that belief every single morning for 31 years without expecting it to be remembered. The world is fuller of witnesses than we know when we are doing the thing that will one day call them forward. That October, Renee hung a framed photograph on the wall of the diner, near the register. It was one of the photographs from the parking lot morning, taken by a woman Clyde had never met, who had driven in from Milledgeville when she heard, and who had had a camera with her. It showed Clyde in his good shirt, standing in the pale morning light of the parking lot, with Marcus on one side and Renee on the other, and behind them, the first light of the sun coming up over the roofline of Hendricks Avenue. And in the foreground, if you looked, you could still see the rows of cars. He saw it for the first time when Renee called him in one Saturday to look at the finished setup. He stood in front of it for a long time. "You're going to make the new customers think I own the place," he said. "You practically did," Renee said. He snorted softly, which was as close as he got to a laugh. Aisha came out of the kitchen with a plate of biscuits and set them on the counter. They were good. Not perfect yet, but good. Clyde sat down on a stool and ate one with butter and did not say anything about what was right and what still needed work, because some mornings you just eat the biscuit. Devon came out a minute later and refilled his coffee without being asked, same as Clyde had done for customers for 31 years, and the two of them exchanged a look that contained more understanding than words would have needed. The photograph stayed on the wall. New people came in and asked about it. Old regulars would glance up at it sometimes mid-coffee, and remember that Saturday morning, the headlights in the dark, the clapping spreading through the lot, the man standing in the morning light who had fed them without asking anything in return. The biscuits were still good. They had always been good. That is what stays when someone has done a thing with care for long enough. Not the acknowledgement, though the acknowledgement mattered and was right and should have come sooner. What stays is the thing itself. The habit of showing up. The plain, daily decision to make the thing in front of you as good as it can be, not because anyone is watching, not because the reward is visible, but because that is what it means to do work that has dignity. Clyde had known that without being told. He had just needed the world to say it back to him one morning in 200 cars and the sound of hands clapping in the early light. Have you ever had someone in your life who showed up for you so quietly that you almost forgot to thank them? Leave a thought below, because those people deserve to be named. And if you want to hear another story about what faithfulness looks like when nobody's watching, stay close. There's another one waiting. This story is a work of fiction inspired by real human experiences. The characters, setting, and events depicted are not based on any real individuals or specific places.